Hello, my name is Jason Miller, founder of Now Solutions, and we're about to unlock the power of ServiceNow. Okay, looks like we're at 10 or 1,080 subscribers. And yeah, if you could help me out, really appreciate it if you just hit this little red subscribe button. I'm trying to add to the amount of subscribers we got globally, and I'm proud to say that we have subscribers in over 51 countries. So doing a great job. And today we are going to go over, this is the second part of a presentation that I made at Knowledge 18 called User Requirements Strike Back. So if you're in my session, you probably remember this as the common SLA problems and mistakes. So I'll be going over this and also some other topics, the implementation tips more specifically. And just as a review from the last segment, we talked about the different perceptions of the SLAs within different departments within an organization, organizational profiles, and some other good stuff in there. So I'll let you refer to that video, which is the one that preceded this one. So let's talk about one of the main problems that I've seen over the last, 12 years of doing SLA stuff, which is basically not talking about SLAs far enough before we actually get into prod with our applications. So I thought about Fight Club. I'm sure some of you have seen it, the movie that pretty much was dominated by Ed Norton on one side and the alter ego Brad Pitt. And, it says, what's the first rule about Fight Club? Well, I think about the same thing with SLAs, which Tyler asks. And my answer is no one talks about it until it's too late. And not really because it's something so secretive of a concept that everyone really wants to know about it. It's just kind of boring and left to the side. And if you think about it, most of our IT contracts are basically app dev or their support, and then SLAs are kind of somewhere in the middle. So, moving on. I call this the disconnect, and we're going to have a couple of slides that look like this. So right here I just drew out a diagram, and this is kind of the construct that I've spent my career working under, which is basically you have a company or a government entity, because I've done mostly federal work, that puts out an RFP, and they put it out to this vendor. Now, Company A, or the government, has these underpinning contracts with a certain brand, maybe of hardware, which comes to mind a lot, and they negotiate this, but then they have SLAs in this RFP, which are way more stringent than these guys are going to operate to. Or I should say that the the SLAs in the RFP are way more stringent than what Brand X has agreed to in their underpinning contract. So for example, hardware replacement, we might say to Brand X, hey, you got 3 days to ship it to us, but the SLA says, hey, you have 2 days to get the customer's hardware replaced. Well, if you're going to wait 3 days, there's no way you're going to get it to the customer in 2 days. And I'll talk about some of the different tasks that go along with that. So this leads us to something that looks similar. And this is basically Company A says to the vendor, hey, you come up with your underpinning contracts, and just tell us at the end of the day what the SLA is going to look like. And a lot of times, believe it or not, you have two parts of this managed service provider. One that talks to basically talks to Brand X and says, hey, this is our contract. But then in the RFP, when they make, or the response to the RFP, which is called the proposal, they put out something that is way more stringent than what was negotiated here. So if you're entity like Company A or even the federal government or whomever it is, you don't necessarily need to ask the vendor here, because everyone's sensitive about their relationships and business. You don't need to ask them who they're doing business with, but it's a good idea to know what's in these underpinning contracts. And I don't think there's been one customer out there and I always ask this one of the first days that I'm on a new project or at a new place of business, and I'll ask them, what are your underpinning contracts? Can you produce them and show them to me? Just give me the basic, um, numbers that are in there, nothing too detailed. And you'd be surprised at how many people cannot answer that question. So then we have, this is part 3, and this is maybe most of you guys out there who run support desks deal with this, where again, the service desk has to sit here and be they're held accountable by the whatever the CIO wants in the SLA, and then here in the underpinning contract, we have something totally different going on, and this typically happens in large organizations, but don't think it only happens in large organizations. So this kind of goes back to user requirements too, for our applications. Think about when you're getting started with that application, when it's being built. Think about that one special thing that needs to happen in order to make SLAs work within ServiceNow. And I'll just tell you a little story that Chuck Tomasi, Knowledge 17, was building an application, and he forgot to do one thing in the very beginning, and he caught himself and fixed that mistake. So later on, maybe in this segment, maybe in the next one, I'll talk about what that is, because I have a slide that's called the Tomasi slide. So where do 90% of the problems occur with SLAs? Well, yeah, 90% occur with incident management. And the main reason for this is because incidents are unpredictable. We're relying on users to tell us exactly what's going on with an incident. And then it could be totally different. So they could say, hey, my hardware's down, there's something wrong with the machine, but it could turn out to be the server. You bounce from one assignment group to another, and we know that a lot of people out there love putting assignment groups in their SLA start conditions. I don't totally disagree with that. I understand the nature of the beast, but I will propose other ways to construct an SLA. So where do we make our mistakes? In dev. So going back to that Tomasi moment, as I like to refer to it, yeah, you're going to make your mistakes in dev just like you would with an application. You want to test your SLAs in dev, and also be careful, because some people will actually make them in prod, believe it or not. I've seen that before. And you might make you might do well the first couple of times, but eventually you're going to make a mistake and it's going to affect your production instance. So you really don't want that to happen. I call this going through pain. So here's the alternative, and I talked about like the toddler organization and the infant in the previous video. If you're just pulling the data out at the end of a reporting period and you're putting everything into spreadsheets, then you're probably working with this type of stuff here. I know, because this is stuff that I used to use a long time ago to calculate different SLAs, and I can tell you, it really is. It's going through pain. And one thing I want you to take away from this slide is that imagine trying to explain this to your customer, especially one that doesn't know a lot of Excel or anything with formulas. I mean, forget it. They might, they'll just tell you like, you just need to explain it to me in a very clear way. And I'm going to show you actually an easier way in ServiceNow how to get some of these things to make sense and actually in narrative form by using the tool without any configuration whatsoever. So that's going to be in another segment when we do the demo. So I call this SLA Distortion, and here's a result of that, the incident definition that I've seen before that we set up and we think, okay, it's going to be fine. And as we can see here, it kind of goes from at least in this one, it goes from one group to another, and we have all these cancellations in here. But one thing I wanted you to note is that we have this canceled here, and then the has breached is true. So chances are, guess what happened? It was canceled after it was already breached. We as humans, at the end of a reporting period, factor all the ones that are canceled out. So we have one that breached. So what is that? How does that affect our SLA success percentage? Also, if we like to run average time for a specific type of SLA or incident, think about if we factored all these cancellations out and we didn't catch any retroactive data, then we would only get a sliver of what is going on. So we would incorrectly report that average time. So let's get to our SLA implementation tips. A, B, C. A always, B, C careful. Always be careful. Always be careful. Like I said, never build these in prod, and be aware of your cancel conditions, which I just showed you. Use the condition count to determine what's going on, or to determine what I call the worst case scenario, which basically means in your start condition, you'll want to configure, and I have a video out there on this, how to configure your condition count. Now, why is that a big deal? Because if you're just getting started with SLAs, you're going to want to know the highest amount of records that could possibly be produced because of that start condition. Now, of course, the cancel has to be set a certain way, and also your stop condition are going to control whether that SLA definition actually fires or not. So here's a big one. If you step into a situation where you have to take over someone else's work, don't always assume that it's correct or it's the best. There are many different ways to do SLAs. Next, let's assume that we have a customer in Paris. We have a support team that's in Florida, and then we have a server or a configuration item out in California. How do these three things, how are they calculated in the SLA? Main takeaway, make sure your customer understands that it might not be based on their time zone. So their expectation of what you put on paper should also be reflected in the tool. And exactly what are you tracking? Is it a support team's performance, or is it delivery of a service or even a good to a customer? In addition, or touching on the point of underpinning contracts, which I mentioned before, let's also understand when that hardware comes in, do we need to reimage it? If so, then we're going to want to factor that in to the SLA duration, or the target as sometimes we refer to it. And when you're moving definitions, maybe for the first time especially, make sure they're not active, I would say anyway, because once you arm these things, they're like a heat-seeking missile. They just don't know any better. The way you programmed them, they're going to seek and destroy, and next thing you know, you're going to have a couple of thousand task SLA records lined up. And I can tell you a little story of me moving some SLA definitions from one instance to another. And I had a simple condition for the condition type. And the next morning I woke up, I looked at the task SLA table, and there were an additional 5,000 records that were created. And it's a good thing that I only had moved that stuff to test, because had I moved it to prod, it might have caused a huge impact on the instance performance. Communicate before moving to prod, just like you would with an application. Same principle. Okay, this is the Tomasi slide. And here, the point is this. This right here is usually where the CIO or someone in the ivory tower will say to you, you know what, we just created this application. Please go ahead and build some SLAs. This is where you should be discussing it, though. The reason why was because when Chuck was building that app back at Knowledge 17, he noticed really quickly that he forgot to extend the task table. If you don't extend the task table, then guess what? You can't do SLAs unless you create a table that maybe references it. So for example, on the outage table, you can't create SLAs. Incident alert, you cannot do it. Incident alert task, you can. So that's the key word in there, task, right? Task SLA, task, it extends down to incident or problem. So those are just a couple of examples there. I like to think of SLA definitions or the creation of them kind of like baking a cake. You have a couple of key ingredients. You got your customers, you got your clock, conditions, and cancellations. Now, the first three might seem kind of, I already know that, right? So customers have a certain expectation, but more importantly, we need to communicate it to them. 2, the clock. So remember that triple constraint there. You got your schedule, you got your duration, and then you got your time zone. Might be a couple other things, but that basically will dictate how that clock runs. Conditions. So, like I said, in the start condition, I think everybody in the world puts assignment group in there. I think there's other ways to do it. Maybe I'll show you a couple in the next video. We'll see. Cancellations. One thing I like to track is what's the rate of cancellations on this specific SLA definition, meaning that, or for example, in the past, I've seen up to a 30% cancellation rate on one SLA definition. When I see that, I just ask the question, what am I getting wrong, or what is this SLA, or what was it intended to do, and why is it canceling so much? 1 out of every 3, that seems a little bit high to me. But hey, maybe it's just the nature of the beast. But if you see something that high, I suggest that you take a look at them. Okay, I call this our first timers SLA baking tips. So, touching on that assignment group in the incident table, for example, maybe you want to use something more static. For me, I would think that maybe you could put something in the customer's profile to differentiate between customers. That's one way to go. Another one is configuration item. I like to think the configuration item is a little bit more stable in a ticket than the assignment group. Those are more predictable. Chances are your SLAs are not going to cancel as much. Now, if you're having trouble getting that SLA to fire, what I suggest doing is an insert and stay. So basically, what you want to do is create the definition, then basically change the name, hit insert and stay. You'll see another one line up when you go to the SLA definitions, and then try initiating the SLA using the start conditions. Also, here's one, use SLA timeline. So you remember that going through pain slide where I showed you all those formulas? Well, SLA timeline is going to clarify things a lot better, and I'm going to show you that in a future video. Always have someone else test and verify the SLA results. I think this goes without saying, but you'd be surprised at how many people just throw these things into production and then wonder why later on it didn't perform as expected. I like to call this synergy. So basically what I did was I set up 2 SLA definitions, and I actually had this before where a customer had asked me, I want 2 SLA definitions, one for each one of these assignment groups, and then I want one to pause when the other one has the ticket, and they're going to kind of pass the ticket back and forth because that's the natural part of what's going on here for this incident or this incident type. I said sure, and then the way I looked at it was, okay, the business pause duration should be roughly the same as the business elapse time. Not always. It could get assigned to a group that's not part of this, and that would affect the whole equation. But I thought if all things were correct and our assumptions were correct, then it would perform this way. So it's an example of how it can actually work using assignment group. And then right here, I like to note that I had it cancel at the very end if it was not assigned to, not assigned to this group right here. A lot of people don't put that in their closed conditions. They just put down if it's closed or if it's resolved or canceled or whatever, but they don't actually say it has to be assigned to this group. So I thought that was a little bit different in my approach. Okay, this concludes our segment today. Next time we're going to talk about handy SLA features, and we're going to work in the tool a little bit. My apologies for not working in the tool this time, but as you can see here in my instance, there was some maintenance in progress. My name's Jason Miller, founder of Aspinall Solutions, and we've just unlocked the power of ServiceNow.